If you haven't already noticed, Disney has been foregoing a new trend of recreating their own animated classics into live-action motion pictures. Even though they've been doing this since the mid-1990s with 101 Dalmatians, it never really took off until the release of Tim Burton's mediocre reboot of Alice in Wonderland, which paved the way for the even worse Sleeping Beauty retelling, Maleficent, and now with the film I'm about to review, Cinderella. Is it as poorly conceived as the previous two films I mentioned, or did they actually do justice to the original source this time around? Well, before we answer that, a little backstory. The original Cinderella, based on the popular fairy tale by Charles Perrault, was released in 1950 and was the 12th animated film that Walt Disney produced while he was still alive. It follows the story of a young maiden, ruled under the harsh extremes of her evil stepmother and stepsisters, who is visited one night by her fairy godmother, who helps make her dreams of attending the royal ball come true. While the story's message might feel a bit outdated and slightly anti-feminist, the movie is still heavily regarded as one of Disney's crowning achievements more than half a century later. And that brings us to the 2015 live-action reboot, which is directed by Shakespearean auteur Kenneth Branagh and stars Downton Abbey's Lily James as Cinderella, Game of Thrones' Richard Madden as the charming prince, Oscar winner Cate Blanchett as the evil stepmother, and former lover of Tim Burton, Helena Bonham Carter, as the fairy godmother. While the new film stays fairly close to the original source, there are just enough minor adjustments to make it stand out on its own. And when you compare it to Disney's previous live-action efforts, it's a surprisingly welcome change of pace. At first glance, this film can easily be called one of the year's most gorgeous-looking movies based on its costume and production designs alone, but one of the best aspects of the film are the much-needed development between a few key characters, especially between Cinderella and her prince. This was the one major element from the original movie that I felt was completely lacking that I'd hoped the filmmakers would tweak in the new film, and sure enough, they somehow managed to make their blossoming romance work from the moment these two lock eyes on one another. It also helps that Lily James and Richard Madden have such amazing on-screen chemistry together that you can't help but look forward to seeing them inevitably live happily ever after, as long as this guy doesn't show up at their wedding reception. There are also the subplots involving each of the main characters' parents, which are so genuinely moving and heartbreaking that you would be hard-pressed not to get choked up during, and as for Cate Blanchett, she is having the time of her life chewing up the scenery as the main central villain, and yet there comes a point later on in the film where she starts to bring a little bit more dimension to her otherwise one-note character that's actually quite effective. But if there were anything about this film that I found slightly off-putting, it would probably have to be the fairy godmother sequence. Yes, I know this is a very important part to the story, but the way in which it's presented, it feels tonally out of place in comparison to the rest of the film, which almost plays out like a traditional Jane Austen production. And that's not to say that Helena Bonham Carter does a poor job in the role, she doesn't. I just felt that there could have been a more creative approach to her scenes than just taking cues from the Tim Burton handbook. But despite the movie's shortcomings, I still thought this was an excellent reimagining of a classic story that's by far the best live-action adaptation that Disney has put out due to its strikingly beautiful imagery and empowering message of overcoming grief and being empathetic towards those who deserve less. So on a scale from 1 to 10, I am giving Cinderella a very solid 8. With that said, our show is now concluded. I'm the host, and I will see you next time on another Midnight Movie Madness.